Alright, greetings everyone. This is the third time I'm taking this today. I think I've got it this time. My coffee is kicked in, so we're going to keep this in 10 minutes this time and actually talk about the thing I came to talk about. Uh, Joel Clark here, lead designer of Lone Wolf Fist, etc., etc. Okay, so Bestiary is done, ish. It's done. I'm moving the disaster rules and the armies rules into the lore chapter because I don't want to work on them right now. I'll just work on them later. They might find their way back into the bestiary later, but as far as all the monsters and the rules for monsters, they're done. Um, it's actually okay. So I worked on this about the same time last year. It's been a year since I got to actually work on this again. I'm so angry about that. I can't even tell you. It's ridiculous and disappointing. But whatever. I got back to it, and the writing I did initially was really good. The ideas that I was working out a year ago, fuck, the year didn't really change them much. The game still pretty much runs the same way. Back then, I altered ferocity a little bit because initially what I did with ferocity was I just split. I split effort into two halves, and one half was ferocity, which is all the physical stuff, and then one half was willpower, which is all the spiritual and intellectual stuff. And they both shared senses because they could see each other. So that was the one trait they both had in common. So if you were rolling ferocity dice, you couldn't take any social or intellectual actions. If you were rolling willpower, you couldn't take any physical actions. It actually worked really well. It wouldn't work now because all of your movements link to agility, so they'd have to share agility too. But I eventually just realized that what I really wanted out of ferocity was an effort pool that I didn't have to worry about skills. So I stripped it down to that core concept, and I just put ferocity in for anything that was animalistic that wouldn't really be using skills. And in the case where something could use a particular kind of skill, like for example, like if a wolf had like a scent ability, I would just call that out under its description. Be like, okay, they can use effort for this one thing, and maybe they get a bonus to it. Similarly, I initially had an idea where the anatomy of a creature each independently acted. So, like, you'd have, like, two fists or two legs, and, like, each one of them kind of gave their own attack and defense and all that. That's sort of been superseded by the way martial arts work, where, if you it requires the use of certain body parts, and if they get injured with an imbalance, you've got to make the imbalance decision. Do I take the dice off, or do I lose access to this attack? And that's actually something that's much deeper into the system now than it used to be. And so it's sort of made that redundant. But it's good design. I do think it's good design, especially with the really big stuff. I actually kept a version of it. But it was a little too complicated for just like a monster you'd encounter. So what I wound up doing was I kept the idea, the basic functionality of it, which was there's anatomy that gives them special permission to do things. For example, the Manticore, one of my favorite monsters, maybe my favorite monster of all time. I gave them bat wings. They don't actually have bat wings, but I like to give them those because I think they look nifty with their little flappy flaps. So their bat wings let them fly. If you attack them, you can choose if you make an imbalance to have that apply to their wings. So they get to make the imbalance decision, the physical imbalance decision. Do I take off from my ferocity dice, or do I lose my access to flight this round? Which is they're the very same kind of choice the players are making, and it's made in that same simple way. Do I lose access to something, or do I take a penalty? And whenever I had independent health keyed to anatomy, it was really messy because you would have to, as a player, make the decision to punch a part of their anatomy that only made them less effective, but didn't actually beat them. And in this way, you're just targeting that one health pool. So you're always beating them, and the way in which you beat them is manifesting strategically in how you're choosing to apply imbalances. This is exactly the same way you would fight an NPC, which had a degree and use martial arts. You're choosing where you want to force them to make the decision between special permissions and general effectiveness, and that's fine. That actually works really well, and it's much more streamlined this way. So by making it less segmented and more streamlined and more like you fight normal warriors and what have you, I was able to kind of get what I wanted out of monsters. I was also able to keep one of the things I liked about the way monsters kind of emerged as like how they played, which was they had really big die pools. So in initial rounds, they were really deadly because they got a lot of actions. And I even gave them something very similar to weapons. They're able to use their monstrous appendages to basically use weapon attacks. So it's kind of like having a weapon in both hands. And different monsters have different like levels of that depending on how powerful they are and how powerful their appendages are. This also again incentivizes you to think about, well, do I want to keep this Manticore's sting from attacking someone in a future round, or do I want to disable one of their claws right now, which is a lesser thing to worry about, but he's been using very consistently to kick our asses with. So again, it's comparable to how a character would do it. One of the innovations from, again, a year ago was charge attacks, which as an outgrowth of having a lot of dice and a lot of actions, a lot of times I'd have additional actions that were like rank 2 or something, and they weren't super, like, having a monster just attack and swipe over and over again isn't really super fascinating as a decision to make for a GM, and it's not very interesting descriptively. So what I did with those is I said, okay, you can set those aside and use them to charge up really powerful attacks, kind of the equivalent of opening chakra and getting more prana and spinning it on stuff, which is what you'd be doing with a Kung Fu RPG, Kung Fu in PC. But with like a Manticore, like his Berserk thing where he goes crazy and like launches spines at people. It hits the whole battlefield. It's a really big, nasty attack, but it takes like 3 or 4 sets to charge up. So you're not going to necessarily do it every round, even though you've got like 15 dice. You roll your attacks. You do, a couple of attacks per guy, maybe one big attack, and then you move around and do stuff. And then like for any of your extras, you just set them aside. So like round 2, you can lead by diving into this big attack and then doing a full attack tree after that. So that makes those first few rounds really intense and also gives them something to do in later rounds too, especially if they've been banking those actions and reducing their effectiveness in the early rounds. So the whole combat has this wonderful texture now with bigger monsters. And I did a few other streamlined things. A lot of monsters are just basically people, but not people. Like there's like monkey people. They're just monkeys, but they're also people. So I just had this tag that I called Humanesque, where they're just like a person. And I figured, like, initially I had this resistance to the idea that you would, like, you would take these guys as followers or train them or whatever, because it's not really a game about that. It's a game about humans in the post-apocalypse. And then I thought about it more, and I'm like, I actually don't care. Like, if somebody wants to even play one of these things, they're not really distinct from humans in any kind of meaningful way. Like, stats are, So, like, you could even play one of these guys. I don't give a shit. And there's a lot of things like that are basically just people but kind of weird. There's like people that are ghosts, and they're not like bad guy ghosts, aren't even necessarily dead. They're just ghost-like. There you go. They're basically people, but they're ghosts, sort of. Even really, really interesting bad guys like the Zhongshi, who are the hopping vampires. They're basically people. They've got a couple of weirdnesses about them, but they're basically people. But I liked what the Zhongshi did, so I gave a lot of those things like a pathway to learn mystic martial arts, and like very specific ones they could learn, or specific ways they could learn them. Like whenever the Zhongshi eat 1,000 people, they basically become low-level martial artists, like shadow vipers with really specific power sets. So yeah, overall, I'm really happy with it, and when it came to the individually powerful anatomy with their health tracks and everything, I put that on Titans. Holy crap, I'm really happy with the Titan rules. I don't know how they're going to suss out and play, but instead of having an action pool, which was like ridiculously huge, I gave them something called a Calamity pool, which is just like, it's the first time I've actually used really narrative kind of facing mechanics in this. I don't like doing that. I like for the things you are doing to be directly mapped to an action. But with Calamity Dice, it's like this is the passive, or not necessarily, not consequentially a direct result of this thing's action, but more indirectly a result of this thing's rampage. Like, whenever there's like Godzilla's going crazy and he's smashing buildings, when he hits a building with his paw, like that's an action he's taking, but a Calamity Die isn't that. A Calamity Die is like when the camera like pans down to like one of the main characters and they're like, oh, and like a big chunk of building comes at them. The Calamity Dice are that. Like whenever you roll those dice and you get like a set of 4, that's a rank 4 hazard of that building falling on you. Like that's what those do. They're just the passive destruction that's like character facing. So, and they're sort of similar to legendary actions from 5th edition, which aren't a terrible idea design wise. They're pretty innovative in a lot of ways. So, So yeah, I gave them those, and then for their actual actions, I just gave them, and I also gave disasters this, by the way, like natural disasters this, by the way. I just gave them a list of things they would do based on their anatomy. So like one of the big ones is like this big like humanoid thing, and it's got 2 foot attacks, which is just it walking. So it slams down its foot on something and crushes it, and it causes a localized earthquake, and then it slams the other one and crushes it and causes a localized earthquake, and then it moves the distance between those things. So, and the fun thing is, if it steps on something that it can't break, it stubs its toe on it and falls over and causes a different earthquake somewhere else. So that was fun. And then, of course, it's got fist attacks when it smashes things. And that particular thing, Batara Kala, the Sun Eater, he can unhinge his jaw, and there's just this black hole inside of him, and he just sucks in an entire city. Basically, all of those things, once or so per scene that they're rampaging, can do one really super powerful attack. That's the equivalent of a nuclear warhead on one field somewhere. So yeah, I didn't give those a charge up mechanic. I probably should have done that. I kind of implied that all of them. Oh man, I need to take my garbage down here. It's all. I've been sitting in front of the screen for like the last 4 days, so this is just filled with like junk food wrappers right now. My little garbage thing. But like, okay, so the point I'm making here is that like I kind of implied that all of them have a purpose for their super attack because they can only do it once, and they can only be active for a little while. I wanted to think of these things like Shadow of the Colossus monsters, where they're generally indolent or just part of the landscape, and then certain things can cause them to wake up and go on a rampage. Then they kind of just go back to sleep afterwards. And I like that, because instead of having to deal with something that's constantly stomping around causing havoc, you have to kind of like stumble into it, and then it causes havoc. Or something has to happen before it causes havoc. Oh, thank you, coffee. God, it's so good. And they're climbable. You can climb on them. And although they are immune to most direct attacks, you can hit them with really big attacks. Ones that like cover big areas, you can hit them with those. They got a lot of armor and a lot of health, but you can hit them with them. Their individual parts of their anatomy are not. Because they're so titanic, you can target those individual parts, and if you injure them, they're not invulnerable to imbalances. So, yes, Kenshiro can go and fight Godzilla and do Hakudo no Ken to paralyze one of its arms, or its, like, whatever thing makes its atomic fire breath, so that it can't use it. That's a thing you can do in this game now. Officially. It's officially a rule. Yep. I'm really proud of the Titan rules. Anyway, so, but yeah, there's all kinds of stuff. There's swarms of things. There's mechanical beings. There's the undead. There's ghosts. There are summonable demons and spirits. There are gods and things that are pretending to be gods and things that might be gods. I don't know, maybe. All that stuff's in the bestiary. So check it out. Theoretically, all of this stuff works really good and produces very, very interesting, rich fights. I'm like 30, 35, 33% certain that it will do those things. There's a slight chance that none of it's been thoroughly tested enough for that to be the case. I have tried the large die pool super monsters on a few occasions before, and I find with starting characters they're a touch much. They're a little more deadly than the starting characters are capable of dealing with. That might just because of the situations they were getting fought in. But yeah, 30%, 20, 25 definitely % chance that these things totally work and will be perfectly fine in your games that you're running right now if you are running one. At least a 15% chance. I'm giving you 10%. Easy 5%. Anyway, so enjoy the bestiary. Next up is going to be the armory. We're finally going to finish that. There's a lot less entries for me to do on that one, so it should be easy. And then there'll be rules for making artifacts, and there'll be a brief list of artifact things. Mostly artifact weapons and swords, because they're my favorite thing to design. So yeah, look forward to all that. That's happening probably this weekend. I'm actually sending the bestiary that you guys now have access to Albert. He's going to be editing it as his next project, and then it'll be the armory, and then Laura's, and it's just off the layout. So you guys look forward to it. This week and next, this is when we're doing it. It's happening. We're actually gonna have the stupid fucking game done already. Well, bye.